Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all well. Welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Getting Started with Interactive Reporting. My name is Chris, and I work in the IT department here at Wolfram. The topic today will be presented by Joseph, who is a technical consultant here at Wolfram. If you have any questions, please feel free to log them using the Q&A tab on your screen, and Joseph will answer them as the talk goes on or at the end. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please refresh or restart your browser and rejoin the webinar. This should fix the issue. With all that said, the webinar will now begin, and I hope you enjoy. Over to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, welcome everyone. So thank you for coming today. I have people from joining on Big Marker and people joining on YouTube. So I welcome your questions. It's going to be an hour and a half today, so we have lots of time to go over your questions, and I'm always interested in the problems people will come across in these types of webinars. So the more engagement, the better. If you can download the notebook, I encourage you to do so you can follow along. But with all that said, we can start. So let me go through the outline. So we'll start by just talking about what a dashboard is, the way that term is used these days, and leading on to how we can start to make some of our own. We'll talk about how we can use the Wolfram knowledge base to get some live data, live or historic data. We'll go into layout and styling, how you do that using the Wolfram language. Try and see some similarities between that and other languages that you'd use for layout and styling. And then we'll be using the Wolfram Cloud a lot today. So building a dashboard for your own use is great. That's something I've done, but maybe you want to make it available to other people or to yourself from a different device, in which case you want to be able to deploy it to the cloud. Okay, so we'll look at deploying static content, dynamic content, delivery of reports through things like automated sending of emails. Okay, we'll look at some instances where the cloud might go wrong if there are certain restrictions that your program doesn't satisfy. And then we'll finish off with an advanced example. Okay, so I hope you enjoy. I hope you can take something from this and then apply it to your own projects or your own work. I wanted to draw your attention to this kind of manipulate on the first page here. This is actually a very dense, lots of information contained in here. And it's essentially checking if different data sets abide by what is called Benford's law. Now, those of you who are familiar with statistics and maybe this area of mathematics, you'll know that it's Benford's law in layman's terms describes the abundance of the number one when you're sampling from a distribution that spans lots of orders of magnitude. So this is really just checking if these data sets abide by this. And it's kind of related to this. That's why I chose it, because, you know, it's dynamic. We can choose different data sets, and then we're really seeing a dashboard in the end as the end product. And the code for this is actually in the initialization cells at the end, if you're curious. Okay, so what is a dashboard? So in the most simple terms, it's a useful way to display information. Okay, you can encode that information in tables, charts, etc. Okay, Ideally, this is a kind of user-friendly way. You might want to show a company's metrics or some personal statistics or something like that. And I want to kind of think about this, really try and reach people with things they might use themselves. So I wonder if anyone has heard of Notion, something like this. So I use Notion quite a bit. Uh, so I googled Notion dashboard, and this is what comes up. So you might have a Notion dashboard for your personal productivity system or something like that. Um, yeah, this is an example of one of the tools that the cool kids are using these days. And this is written in JavaScript and React, actually. Um, Another one that comes to mind is Obsidian, which is a kind of note-taking software. People have built dashboards like built on top of the baseline product and built something that you'd call a dashboard, right? Uh, this is just what comes up when you Google dashboard, and it's interesting to see how you have to get quite far down before you start to see the dashboard of a car, which 20 years ago, this is probably what you'd think of when you say dashboard. Okay, so let's say this is a well understood term. We're essentially just going to build up more and more complicated dashboards as this talk goes on, right? Starting from a very simple one, which is a financial data plot. Okay, so we're going to use this function financial data, built-in Wolfram language function. All we need is the stock ticker symbol. And then we're going to specify a time frame that we want this data for. So let's have a look at what this looks like. So very simple. So yes, we're calling this static. I do actually want to draw your attention to the tooltips. So if I hover my mouse over this, in the newer Wolfram versions, you actually see a kind of interactive tooltip, even on these static plots, okay? Which I think is quite user-friendly. Right. So taking from this very static case and making something more dynamic, you might want to use this function, interactive trading chart, okay? This is showing prices and volume for a list of dates that you yourself specify. So we want the interactive trading chart for Google or the Google stock. Okay, so it's just taking a second to render here. Sometimes until you like interact with these, they don't quite render properly, but I haven't had this problem before. Let me just run this again because this is calling on lots of external data. Okay, here we are. So as you can see, this is a big upgrade. We have lots of data here. It's very interactive. We can actually change the time frame interactively. Okay, we can change the chart type if we just want a line plots, to just want to simplify things, or we can see these candles. Okay, and then this is where it gets really interesting. If you any people interested in finance, you can use all of these indicators. Okay, so maybe I want to add some standard error bands to the plot and change back to just a line. Okay, and this is all accessible from the notebook. We have used one line of code. We've made something dynamic and interactive. But only we can see this, right? And we have to have Mathematica installed on the desktop in order to see it. So let's have a look at what happens when we cloud deploy this. So I ran this earlier just to make sure I was signed into the cloud, but I can run it again. And I'm just deploying the static plot. So this. Notice I haven't set this equal to some symbol. I'm actually kind of regenerating the plot and then deploying the result, if that makes sense. Okay, and this string here is just telling the kernel where to deploy it. So where on the cloud. So even if I don't have a folder called dashboards, this is going to make one. Okay, and just call it basic financial dashboard. So I can click this link and I will show you where it takes me. Okay, here we are. So very, very simple, but exactly what we had before, accessible at this URL. Okay, notice this is where you might want to start picking apart some things in the URL, like this obj, which is indicating that this is an object. Okay, there's no coding going on here. We can't interact with this. We can't execute code on this page. This is just an object. It's in my cloud account in the folder dashboards. All right. Appearance elements goes to none, just means we have no kind of styling surrounding this object. Great. Okay, so that's the basics. And what we talk about from now on is just more detailed examples of this. And a bit more of how we can use the cloud to make things easier for ourselves. So I'll just check for questions. I have one here from Jim, which says they use Benford's law in auditing to detect certain types of fraud. Yeah, I've heard of it being used to detect fraud as well. Oh, very good. Okay, moving on. So I mentioned we're going to know how to get some built-in data using Wolfram language commands because of the vast knowledge base and repositories that the Wolfram ecosystem has, right? So just running this example data, we can see the different types of example data that we have immediate access to. So I just took the first of these, aerial image, where we just have some examples of aerial images. You can also get satellite images using Wolfram language, but we're just keeping it simple and focusing on the example data. So I want an aerial image of the Pentagon. If you're unfamiliar with the syntax, hopefully you can just kind of pick this up as I go along. You know, if we just queried example data with aerial image, then it's not clear which aerial image we want. So we need to specify that we want the Pentagon. And Pentagon will be one of a fixed number of example data aerial images that we can choose from. Okay, I actually think they come up, I think, in a predictive text kind of way here. So here we are. See what this one looks like. Okay. Okay, now we're going to move on to entities. So I mentioned about like built-in data, and using example data, we get this built-in data from the Wolfram data repository. Perhaps a more appropriate use of the term built-in is with these things we call entities. So this section of the code, the entity that is the country of France, renders as this kind of nicely styled orange symbol here, and this has inside of it all of this information about the country of France. Okay, and we just query this really easily. We want the entity value of the population, and as you can see, this doesn't just return an integer of 64.8 million. It it returns a quantity of people, if that makes sense. And you can query some really strange things. Um, Strange. I didn't say strange. I should say interesting and uh, lots of different properties of anything you can think of, really. Famous scientists, animals, countries, um, things like volcanoes and mountains and rivers and lakes and things like that. Yeah, all within this entity framework. So check this out if you didn't know already. And this is just showing how you can access the same information with natural language. So, if you don't exactly know the syntax, then natural language is your friend. And you can just open a new code cell and press equals, and you get natural language input. Someone was telling me something recently. I just want to try it. If you can get like the gestation period of a whale. Let's see. There we go. So, yes, I didn't specify which whale, so I believe I've got lots of different information here. But that is an example of where you can go with this. Okay, right. So we're on the topic of importing data. So I just want to show a really simple example. This is in our additional files if you downloaded the notebook and the files that came with it. So we're just going to import this. Just some standard Latin text that's in an Excel file, but it could have been in any real file that supports text. And when I run this $ import formats, we can see which file types are supported in the notebook. Okay, so pretty much any file type you can think of. Recently, I looked into this JSON LD, which is stands for JSON Links Database. It's essentially a way you can make JSON objects work better with databases. But yes, some are much more exotic, let's say, than that. Similarly, with export formats, you're going to get lots of overlap with this. Yeah. Okay, and then the next bit just talks about how we can import and export data to the cloud. So we called this file, we imported it, but we set it equal to this local variable. And what we're going to use is this function cloud put. We're going to put the variable local into the cloud and give it the name example file. And once it's there, we can import it as a cloud object. Okay, so that's what's happening in this cell. No surprise there. But if I go to my cloud, I should see that file. And I do. But take a look at this. We've got the name example file. We've got the exact same information just in the cloud. Okay, so hopefully this is starting to piece together if you weren't aware of this functionality before. Okay, we can define a cloud symbol which is stored in the cloud. So this is an example of us taking the symbol that is the string that is x and setting that equal to 10 factorial. So I believe it does render here as well, but this symbol x is stored in the cloud. So this cloud symbol of X just gets us the value, kind of retrieves it from the cloud, but I want to kind of show you some other functionality here. I can just run this cloud expressions function, and this gives a list of named cloud expressions that are kind of owned by me. So there are none, because this wasn't a cloud expression, it was a cloud symbol. But it's a very similar idea. Similar thing with cloud objects. Okay, we can get a list of all of the cloud objects that are owned by me. So this is everything in my Wolfram cloud. There's not much. I like to keep it from building up. But yeah, so let me show you the documentation for cloud expression, where you have like cloud expression of name represents an expression whose value is persistently stored in the cloud. All right. So we just use the cloud symbol. Notice how you can actually perform operations on these cloud expressions from the notebook, but all the while it's stored in the cloud the whole time. Okay, so finally let's retrieve this from the cloud and also show how we can import some data directly from websites. So here we're going to wolfram.com and importing the Wolfie logo. So we know exactly where to find that. So this is just the result. So all we need is the URL really. And we can also import, well, let me show you what this looks like. So say we just had the URL and then we have a comma, and then all of these options come down of different things we can import from the website. So not all of these will be appropriate, but the most common ones you'll need will be at the top here. And I believe it said data. So what does this look like? I believe it's a kind of nested lists of all the things you can click on the website, for example. Cool, right. Now we saw there like importing from a URL, and that makes me think of the function URL read. So if you want a bit more control of what you're doing in that URL, URL read generally can be fine-tuned to a greater extent than import can. Okay, yeah. So this is another way you can grab data from a website. And I've been playing around quite a bit with this recently, as well as functions like web execute, which is really cool because you can start a web session and maybe you want to like execute some JavaScript on a website whose URL you know. So yeah, as you can see, you need to start a web session before you do the web executing, and then delete the session afterwards. Okay. So I wanted to kind of run through just a short example if you wanted to, see what a quick use of import would be. But so let's say we wanted some information from like a Wikipedia article. So I'll show you two ways of doing this. One would just be going to Wikipedia, getting the URL. I don't know if anyone has any suggestions. If I don't see any in the chat, I'll just Um, I'll just use this. I can come back to URL read, but let's say we just want to import the data from the Wikipedia article for gravitational microlensing, right? Now, this on its own might not be that useful to us, okay? Because you've got all of the formatting that comes along with a website. So we can use this function text words on this, okay, which makes sure we only have words and formats them in a nice list of strings. We can use delete stop words, delete all one word, okay, and then we don't have words like and, the, a, things like that. Okay, and then maybe we just want to make a word cloud of this. Here we are. Okay, so we do have some symbols that maybe we don't want, and you can take care of that with more fine tuning. But in principle, this is a fun use of import. And I just wanted to draw your attention to this because you can replace this with Wikipedia data and then just gravitational microlensing. This should return the same thing. Check the documentation. Yeah, let's give it a try. So Wolfram language built-in function called gravitational microlensing. And in fact, this might be more appropriate than this, because it might use less of the formatting that comes along with the URL. But yeah, it's very similar. So 2 ways of doing the same thing. Right. So I'm just going to check the chat. Someone has asked to elaborate a little bit on what you might use URL read. So yeah, no problem. So let me bring up the documentation here. So URL read sends a request to a URL and reads back the response, returning it as a response object. Okay, so sometimes you can just use URL read and get a HTTP response. Okay. You can get different elements of the HTTP response, like the status code, for example. Okay, so this might just be checking the status of a URL. Let's look at some other examples. You can build a URL from components. You can use different methods, which would be in the options of URL read. So let's have a look at the details and options. Sometimes your HTTP request may require like a username or a password, that kind of thing. Okay. Let's have a look at the neat examples section. That's always fun on the documentation. So this is actually using URL read to import an defined API function. Okay. We'll go into API functions later on in the talk. Okay, I'm digressing a bit here. So let me move on to something. Let's talk about layout for a second. So maybe some of you have used HTML and CSS before. Um, in HTML, you have things like headers, footers, sidebars, that kind of thing, things like that, which organize a web page. And whilst we won't do any kind of complicated web development today, whenever you make something in Wolfram language, you're probably going to need to have some knowledge of these layout functions. Okay, so this will just go through the basics of how to use functions like grid, column, and row to organize data and make it more user-friendly. So I see Mateo's question. Yeah, sorry, we will get back to building dashboards. So grid needs a list of lists, and then we'll format the data like so. Column just needs a list and formats it like this. Row works just like column, but horizontally, and we can add options like spacer here. Okay. You can use grid in the same way as row. You just need another set of curly brackets. Okay. And then often frame is useful. This adding a frame or dividers is useful to just remind yourself where your cells are beginning and ending. Okay, so I'm going to just make a grid here with some random things, an image, uh, numerical value of the golden ratio, empty string, x cubed, etc. And we're going to say dividers goes to all. Okay, so each one of these has taken up a certain amount of size that's kind of that we can control, but I didn't control here. And dividers goes to all puts a divider around everything and between everything. Okay, and we can look at how we can customize dividers. So maybe you just want them interior to the thing, in which case we have this. Or we can have only vertical dividers like this. So we can see that we actually have nothing in column 3 when we do this, right? Okay. Yeah, so options like padding and spacing are really useful when it comes to formatting things like this, spacings. And like some of you may not see much of a use case for this, but like for me, I have a physics background, and this kind of styling and layout stuff wasn't that interesting to me when I first started using Wolfram language, but I've since found it really useful and started to find uses for it everywhere. Because on some level, if you've created something, you want people to be able to see it and not be put off by the clutter. And yeah, sometimes it's um, you save yourself time and effort in organizing things and making sure the layout is appropriate and doing what the thing you've created is supposed to do. Okay. Now, the next section goes on to how these grids can be nested. So we have a row inside a grid, a row and a column inside a grid. So, if you've been paying attention to the syntax here, you might see how the row and column are in the same list. So try and have a think about what that might look like when we actually execute this. and we've used frame goes to all. So frame goes to all and dividers goes to all. Does the same thing. Okay, so the second row of grid has a row and a column. And then this is just scaling this up. So this is really not using anything new. It's nesting grids, and it's using these kind of helper layout functions called span from left and span from above. So let's just look at one of these. Showing you an example is the best way here. So this grid from numbers 1 to 9, but skipping out 5. So 5 has been skipped, but has used span from left to let the 4 span both boxes. That makes sense. Okay, so let's see what we get here. Very simple result. You know, it looks like a lot of code, but it's really not. It's just been structured to make it obvious what's going on. And this is just showing you some more kind of span from above and span from both functionality. Sometimes you might not want to show all of the information if you've got a really large number, like 100 factorial, so we can use pane to kind of constrain it and make it scrollable. Okay, sometimes sometimes you would have a scroll bar, but this shrink to fit option has shrunk the text such that we don't need a scroll bar. Okay. And then we're just getting a slightly more complicated grid structure here. This random image, you might be able to tell, is just a random image of pixels with values of 0 and 1. In fact, I wonder, I haven't tried this before, but I'm okay. I say 0 and 1, it could be gray as well, so that's not quite true. But I just used Control-Shift-I. And this gives you the kind of full form of the symbolic object. So I just used Control-Shift-I on this random image, and this is what I got. So you can see that it's just a numeric array. Numeric array, interestingly, having a similar structure to grid. Okay. And these can be useful if you just want to know where something is in your grid. So maybe you get quite a complicated structure and you say, like, I don't actually know what is in this cell. So maybe you just throw something like a random image in there just to remind you where it is. If you've got a more complicated workflow. Okay, now we're going to combine the layout features with the dashboards and the built-in data. So the example here uses the General Electric GE stock, but I wanted to show you how you might just get the ticker symbol for a stock that you know. So this is, I'll just show you the whole thing. I would open a Wolfram Alpha cell, and then if I wanted the Caterpillar company, I'd run this, and then I have a Caterpillar financial entity, which I could have just found with this, but I'll show you the natural language way. Okay, and then I want to know the properties of this. As you can see, there are lots, but what we're interested in is I believe the short symbol. Yes. Okay. This is prefacing that it's held on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay, so let's call this thing financial dashboard and see what it looks like. So remember before we just had the graph. Now we've added in these layout features ourselves. Okay, we've used nested grids and dividers. And it's interesting to see how, take here at the bottom, we're using like customized strings for current value, but then we're like querying the current stock, which is GE, and using functions like financial data, which is, um, finding the value of it and finding the exchange rate. Well, the exchange rate is independent of the stock price, but you know what I mean. Okay. Keep in mind, this is still static, right? And this example, it's kind of interesting. Notice this, the difference in this. So here we have with, and we specify the current stock at the very start. So with, what it does is specifies that all occurrences of these symbols should be replaced with these. So wherever you have current stock, it's GE or General Electric. What if we want more than that stock? Okay, you can take this out of the with and then make this, have this argument that is stock, and show it in a tab view. So this tab view, although it looks like any of the others, it's kind of doing the most work here because it's giving the slot symbol the value of each of these three stocks. So we're just using the map function where we're saying we want these three stocks. So we're mapping this function over these three slots, and then that feeds back into the module. And then everywhere we have the stock symbol, it knows which stock we want. Okay. Just let this run. Okay, so as you can see, the tab view is inside of the other grids, so it is kind of the final nested element. But clicking between these buttons, we can see that the plot completely changes, as do these pieces of information. Okay, we've even got a kind of current time. So let's see if I run it again, give it some time to render, and look out for this number changing. There you go. Okay. Anything else I wanted to mention here? Not that I can think of. I'll just check for questions. So someone has asked, what happens if you leave pane out and print the string directly? Okay, let's have a look. So I think you're referring to this example. I suppose you're wondering what, like, just what 100 factorial looks like when printed out. Let's see. So here we are. Yeah. So this is a trivial example, but there are certain instances where you would want it in this kind of more compact form. I was going to say, oh, there is an option I want to show you as well. I mentioned scroll bars, but you can actually use the option scroll bars. So if this goes to true, and then maybe we make it smaller, so we actually need the scroll bar. Trick here. Okay. Fact. I made it smaller, but because I've got this shrink to fit option, I think it's kind of overruling me. So let's do this. Here we are. Okay, now we have something scrollable. Okay, so you can see the workflow, right? You can see kind of what's going through my mind when I'm running into these issues. And the beauty of it is you only need to learn these things once. Okay, I didn't like layout. Now I quite like the front end side of programming. Okay, and especially because all of these Wolfram built-in functions are so human readable. You know what they do. Okay, so a little bit on styling, and then we'll move on to deploying and more dynamic things. So when you think of styling, you might think size, color, shape, opacity, that kind of thing. So let me show you what comes up when you first use this RGB color function. Um, so you have all of the ways you can use it, but most interesting to me is the ability to actually an option came up before that I can select the color. There we go. So look at this. I can actually interact with this and select a color of my own choosing. So I think this is quite cool. I have no idea what to pick, but it's another example of how you don't really need to know the exact syntax to thrive. Okay, so I've clicked that. It's filled in the numbers for me, and I just press Shift and Enter. And then if I ever want this color again, um, I can just use this RGB color specification. Okay, then we have this style wrapper, which just you can say what size things are, and you can say whether it's bold or italic, etc. Right? So I'm going to wrap this inside a manipulate, start with the word header as size 2, and then just make it bigger and bigger. Okay, I wanted to show you another example here. If I fix the size and actually use the rotate function, this is always just fun doing another kind of manipulate. I'm going to say I'm going to rotate it I degrees as I goes from 0 to 360. That's right. And here we go. Does what you might expect. So this is just showing some styling being applied to the background option of this grid. So we're going to get no background on the first row. This is, a bit too nested to be able to interpret just by looking at it. So let's just execute this and see. Okay. I wasn't quite right about there being no background on the first row because it's explicitly stated later on. But yeah, you can, I don't think I need to go into the details of how how the options of background are indexed. You can kind of start to figure that out for yourselves. Okay, and then we have just another example. We're going to change things like font. Other options come up like rounding radius, um, which determines how much something differs from a straight right angle, and gets more rounded. I think in my preparation of this webinar, actually, this this line of code was originally just inside of this, and I pasted it out just to show how things can be nested. Because as you can see, this is exactly the same as this, and this is exactly the same as this. Okay, so the grids cooperate nicely with one another. Okay. Mateo has asked, how can I insert a block of code in a paragraph that appears and disappears by pressing a button? Okay, interesting question. How can I insert a block of code in a paragraph that appears and disappears by pressing a button? Do you mean a paragraph of text, or is the code itself disappearing? I'm not entirely sure what you mean. To help you on your way, I will mention the button function, which is really, really easy to use. You have what the button says as the first argument, and then what it does when it's clicked as the second argument. Okay, there you are. So you can really scale this up, and I have in fact made lots of dynamic things which fundamentally come down to knowing how to use button. So this could be a good place to start. Okay, thank you for clarifying. It's a paragraph with function and interactive code. Interactive code, interesting. Okay, this could be one where you it might be beyond the scope of this talk to talk about how we can like build it in some interactive code. So I'm happy for you to kind of reach out to us at Wolfram, and we can get back to you on this. Yes, it seems like just starting off with button might not be enough to achieve what you want to do. In my instincts go to knowing how to use button and knowing how to use dynamic variables. Okay, because maybe the piece of code that you want to appear and disappear, that itself needs to be dynamic, and its appearance needs to be controlled by some flag variable or something like that. Okay. You can even imagine the button being clicked to generate another button, and then just making a plot. I've got all of the syntax right here. Okay, perhaps not. Yeah. I think there's an issue there because the other button isn't appearing such that it can be clicked. So it could definitely be done, but I'm not going to go into how you would do that now. Okay, but there's an example of just another case. Okay, right. So around 35 minutes left, and we can start looking at our more complicated examples here. So remember, we defined a financial dashboard before. So what we're going to do here is create a document, create a notebook that has this financial dashboard in it. So this is what comes up. Not sure why this is grayed out, but yeah, this is what it looks like. Okay, so this is the result of our created document, and what we're going to do is save it as a CDF. Okay, a computable PDF. Um, so we need it to be open. Well, we don't need it to be open actually, because this is just going to create a new document anyway. But we export it as this CDF and also use this command system open. I'm going to open it with 14.1, and this will just show you what the CDF that we exported looks like. Okay, so all of these programmatic things that we can do from one notebook to open another, for example. Not sure why it's taking a while, but here we are. Okay. Yes, and this static screen.cdf will be in our directory now because we have exported it. Okay. And there's a note here that users that don't even have a Mathematica license can open CDFs with Wolfram Player. This is another product, but yeah, so you don't necessarily need Mathematica to open CDFs. Okay, and then let's deploy this to the cloud with the permissions going to public so everyone can open it. And let's see what it looks like in a cloud notebook, for example. Okay, so this is it. So if you went to this URL, you should be able to see this. Okay. Yeah, why don't I paste it into the big marker chat just to test this. Before I get lost, I believe Jim has said, oh, he's offered some advice of how you might dynamically show some code using the toggle bar function. Well, thank you very much. I always like to see you guys helping out each other. So yeah, toggler bar. So this could be a helpful way of kind of controlling whether something is shown or not. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, someone has asked, will the CDF also include data that I have imported? Good question. So if you've imported data that you've then set a symbol or equal to the thing that requires that data, then yes, when you export it as a CDF, it will remember it because it has knowledge of the symbols that you've used. That makes sense. You know, if you have lines of code which says, okay, import this, then do something with it, then perhaps you need to go back in there and import the code, import the data, sorry. Yeah, I think that's what you're asking. So yeah, but however, in this example where I do export it, this deployed goes to true option means that let me just double check this. Yes, uh, you can't edit the contents of the notebook. Okay, you can't like go in and change a piece of code in it. You can perhaps execute code, but you can't make edits. Okay. And the reason I linked all these things together, it's like, okay, creating a document, saving it as a CDF, then mentioning how you can open it with Wolfram Player. But Wolfram Player, that means you need to download something on your machine. So that's where the cloud comes in. Okay. The cloud doesn't require any installing of software. So we can just use Wolfram Cloud. And yes, if you guys can check if that URL works that I put in the chat, that would be great. I could even open an incognito window and like check that it works for me, but I do want to carry on with the talk. Okay. Thank you very much, Jim. Right. Now we've reached the point where we are deploying dynamic content. So what we're going to use here is a form page, which is really designed to work in the cloud. We're going to show what it looks like on desktop first, but then ultimately we're going to show what it looks like in the cloud. And we're going to use weather data, which takes a location and returns the weather data corresponding to temperature, cloud cover, rain, things like that. So the goal is create a form which takes a location, interprets that location input as a real world location, and returns the weather data for that location. All right. So this is just showing you how weather data works. We need this interpreter because we need to interpret someone's input, make sure that it's a location. Okay. Also keep in mind you have cities that, well, multiple cities that go by the same name, like Birmingham, UK, and Birmingham, Alabama. What comes to mind? So let's just show this working. Let's say we have interpreter city. So this is the city interpreter, and we're going to run it on London. And then we should return a entity corresponding to the city of London. Okay. Processes a string, returns an entity. And there's lots of different entities you can get. So there's lots of things that can be interpreted, is what I mean by that. So if you look at the drop down here, you have all of these options. And in fact, I know someone who's worked on how dates get interpreted by the interpreter, because as you all know, there are innumerable conventions for how we write dates. So, being able to interpret these is a very difficult task. Right. So here's our form page. We have a grid of temperature, precipitation, wind speed, and cloud cover. We have a condition if the data is missing. There's a chance it might be. Okay. So let's run this and see what it looks like. So I just need a location. So I don't know, I'm going to say Edinburgh. Probably dark up there by now. Here we are. Okay, great. So no worries about the location interpretation there. We've got the weather data using built-in Wolfram language functions. Okay, I've also implemented a time constraint here in case the weather data takes too long to kind of extract. And I also yes, you can actually have default locations here. Like you could specify a default location if you wanted, in which case you could just run weather form with no arguments and it would just default. I've taken that out because I think it's more informative to not have a default. Right. Okay. Uh, now we can deploy it to the cloud. So we've got the same exact thing. Oh dear. I need to sign in again. Yeah, so we've deployed it to the cloud now. We're just showing the same thing, but we would see it in the Wolfram cloud. Okay, this is what it looks like. Got some options from my testing. So let's say we want to see what it's like in Ecuador. Okay, it's also taking into account the time zone there, which is cool. All right. So yes, this took a user's input, and now we're going to look at how we can create dynamic interfaces. All right, so here, this is similar to before where we have a dynamic financial dashboard. Yes, I believe just one stock this time. I think I need to enable, oh, yep, should be fine. Ah, yes, not just one stock, because this function here, this NYSE colon UN star means any stocks that start with UN. That makes sense. So that's why on this drop down, I see all of these options. Okay. Uh, Another one here is a population dashboard, which a bit like before. Before we had a tab view, now we have a pop-up menu allowing us to look at these 3 cities. Okay. And then I mentioned dynamic before, so the value of current city is dynamic. Okay, we're allowing it to change. It's going to start off as New York in this dynamic module, which works exactly like module, but for dynamic variables. Yes. Okay. This synchronous updating goes to false is an option for dynamic module. No, is an option for dynamic, sorry. Okay, here we are. So just give it a second to render, but here we have the interactive dynamic population dashboard. Now, the thing is with these, notice on the cell, it's actually still black as if something's running. And because of these things being dynamic, they actually don't finish evaluating. So you've got to be careful of this in the notebook environment. And I have to be careful because I'm presenting that you don't overwhelm the kernel and cause it to crash because you have these things that are actually like running. So I'm actually going to resolve that just by stopping them from running. Okay, you've kind of seen this before, I think, this cloud deploy, but this time we're going to set the cloud object URL type to an environment. Before it was an object, now it's an environment, so we can click and interact with this. Okay, I mentioned these before, an API function where this helps you integrate your Wolfram language code with other web applications. Okay, you may have heard of the YouTube API, Spotify API. I've done some work with the Jira API for my job. It's really useful to be able to work with this, and you can with Wolfram language. So here we define an API function which takes a string of a location. This in fact does have a default value, and we return the temperature in that location is, and then we get it with weather data. So very similar to before, but we are defining this as an API function, which enables us to um, well, do things like making a GET request in a URL, which I'll talk about. Okay, so here it is. Now I mentioned before we can call it with no arguments because it has a default. Okay. If we want a new argument, we have to write it like this association and deploy it to the cloud. So if I click this, I can then go into this URL and then say, it's actually predicting my text. It's saying, if I could say I want the location to go to Lagos in Nigeria. Okay, so there we are. Straight away, it took our parameter values and it updated the function accordingly, and we have new data. So I think this is really cool. Hopefully you can start to see the applications of this if you work with APIs. Okay, as you can see though, this isn't styled very nicely. We want to add styling to this. So this is where the talk kind of comes full circle, and you realize the benefits of styling if you want anyone to use this, or if you want to, have a bit of fun while you're using it, you want it to look a bit nicer than this. So that's what this does. This just recreates the API with HTML formatting. Yeah. Which I'm not going to go through exactly, but here we have another API which generates a new cloud notebook each time it's called. So we can run this create notebook from desktop, and it's going to generate a cloud object. Okay, and think about like nesting all of these things. So we've defined a function create notebook and then just called that function, but then like look what we're doing here. We're cloud deploying the result of create notebook. So we're just taking this cloud object and deploying it on the cloud. But we're actually executing the URL, doing a HTTP redirect. Deploying an API function where this is just the function that needs to be in the API function's arguments. Does that make sense? So we're kind of stringing it all together in this last step. Let's run this, and you should expect that we get a cloud notebook with just the string hello world. There you are. Okay. And really, if you think about where this is useful in your own life and your own work, once you have the basics down, once you've shown that two applications can talk to one another, the rest is just fine-tuning it. Okay. So this is an example of how we can send a report summary by email. We're going to use a similar kind of financial dashboard to before, but it's going to, I believe, have a option for us to send the results via email. Okay, yeah, exactly, with this button, send results. So let's say I want this stock. Then I click send results. You might have seen $ requester Wolfram ID, which is how this dashboard knows where to send emails. Okay, because if I put $requester Wolfram ID, it will come up with. Sorry, this is still running. See what I mentioned about how sometimes having it still running causes some issues. I'm just going to abort the evaluation of that. Yes, but running requester Wolfram ID returns my email. Or it should. Okay, so I'm just going to try and run this again. Enable dynamic updating. Okay, and then try and make use of this send results, because I do have my email inbox open and I would like to kind of show you the result of this. Because that has worked in the past. Okay. For some reason, maybe I have a previous evaluation that's still running and it's causing this one to fail. But yes, so in principle, we've seen how we can deploy something to the cloud that enables other people to see the very thing itself. But sometimes certain people in an organization, they don't need to see the thing. They just need a summary of the results. So we've got this email sending functionality, and we've got the ability to export a report summary as a text file. That's what this is. That's what this is doing. Okay, the button is now export results, which exports to this location, saying the current value of the stock is this. Okay, that's all just embedded in the same dashboard structure. Okay. So this is the troubleshooting slide. It's just worth mentioning that the functionality of the Wolfram Cloud usually lags behind Mathematica or Wolfram language on desktop. So some functions may work better in the desktop than the cloud. If you think about when you're in the cloud, that's having to send a request to servers and then report back the answer and then re-render it in the cloud, that kind of thing. Okay. This is an example of deploying a broken form to the cloud. And I think this is because certain legal limitations mean that financial data can't be used in these kind of form functions. So, if I just say Tesla, I think I should get a missing, yeah, this data is not available because you're not allowed to extract it in this way. Okay. So yeah, things like that to look out for. Nothing about language itself, but just legal limitations, which means we can't retrieve live financial data for that company. Okay, and there's a note here that you should be very careful about your deployment options, whether you want something to be editable or executable or available to the public or even available to certain regions in the world. Like, you can really refine these options. And in fact, I've done webinars before, maybe doing one in future, where we had members of the audience who like couldn't access the page because they were coming from an IP address that was in France or something like that. So you can really have fun with the permissions, just these options of cloud deploy, which I can show you here. So these are all of the options of cloud deploy. And some of these will have sub options. Okay, but we're coming to the end. We have reached the advanced example. I'm happy to report that I did get an email from my interactive dashboard. So I'm just going to send you or show on screen the email that I got. Okay, so it worked. For some reason it crashed, but before that it worked. So this is the result of pressing the send results button to the request a Wolfram ID, which was my own email. Okay, josephb@wolfram.com. If you have any questions, by the way, you feel free to email me, and I will try and get back to you. Okay, so yes, great. I'm happy with that. So, advanced example. Let's go for that in the last 10 minutes or so. So we write a function to generate a dictionary page for a given word. Okay, we have this function word data, which takes a word which must match the pattern of a lowercase string. Okay, we want definitions, we want the phonetic form, we want the Wikipedia data, we want synonyms, antonyms, all of the above. Okay, and I believe this is just a kind of this is to handle cases where the input didn't match the pattern that we wanted. Okay, and then this dictionary definition function just takes all that and displays it in a nice, you guessed it, dashboard. Okay, so this is just some styling options, etc. Again, another handler for inputs that don't match the lowercase strings. And then here we can just pick any word we like. I was testing this before and I was trying it on some words, but let's try another one. So this kind of necklace, which shows that it's loading. This is just like a progress bar. So here we have the definition, phonetic form, Wikipedia summary, synonyms, similar words even. Not similar in terms of the content of like the definition, but just the letters, I believe. Yeah. And there's actually a button here to hear the pronunciation. So I have shared my audio, so you should be able to hear this.
Zoology.
Um,
Zoology.
yeah, I can't hear anything, but perhaps that worked. I don't know. If you have the notebook, it should work on your own machine. We could do a random choice from word list. Ellipsoidal, great choice. Okay, so that's in the word list, and we've just used our built-in functions, word data, and dictionary definition to create the dashboard that is just the definition page for that word. And it's on topic because, you know, Mathematica is the go-to place if you want to plot ellipsoids or similar 3D surfaces. Okay. Oh, Jim has just confirmed that you could hear it. Excellent. Okay, and with that, we're about finished. So I have 5 minutes left. I can stay for questions, but I have some resources here. How to work with grids, rows, and columns, building on what I said today. APIs, visualizations, cloud functionality. Here's the code that generates the manipulate on the first page, Benford's law. Those that can remember that. So yeah, I just wanted to include that in the initialization cells just to show that it's quite extensive. And I'll just leave this on screen. It's an invitation to come to our next webinar on the 29th of November. Okay, but I will stick around for some questions. Okay, Richard asks, how can I get a copy of the notebook from this session? So if you go to if you have the chat panel on the right of your screen in big marker, then notebook access is provided at the link. If you're, yeah, you asked this question on big marker, so you're on big marker as opposed to YouTube. Yeah, there's a blue box and it says notebook access, and then click the link and you should be able to download it from there. Yeah, thanks everyone for your questions today. I much prefer it when we have people asking questions. Thank you very much, Dietmar. And yeah, so we'll probably finish it there. So thank you very much, everyone. And I hope I'll see you at another one of these.